Mr. Siopa, do you have any objection to taking the oath?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. In that, oh yeah. Okay. That being so, let me swear you in. And you, your full names are?
According to ID, it says Oliver Mposiopa.
Okay. Oliver Mposiopa.
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you are going to give to me today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? And if that is so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You have been sworn in, Mr. Siopa. You will get questions when the time comes from both or from all three of us, or some of the three of us. You are aware and you know Advocate Ngele, and you know and you are aware of Mr. Tom, both of them assisting me in these hearings and elsewhere. Now, you have a statement which you have provided. I suppose you will be speaking to the statement. There seem to be heads which you have addressed, the appointment of a CEO, the facilities, and there's a heading red flags, operational staff, coaching staff, another subheading CSA, then past boards, and that seems to be a summary of what I have before me, which represents your input. I understand that your appearance today is largely in response to allegations that were made by particularly Tsuku Muluku and Nesh Tikambar. Is that right?
That is correct, Advocate.
Then you have the floor, Mr. Siopa, and we are here to listen to you. We'll ask questions now and again.
Okay. Dali, you've got that. Advocate, thank you for you and your team for allowing me the time while sitting in village with the Siopa people in Limpopo, that's when I was made aware of the accusations that came. I was happy to be a village boy and had what my family has.
Yes.
But then my name got mentioned in terms of Dadenesh and Dadetsuku during a period of which I looked after the union as the CEO. And I'll go by, this is something that I came to learn about cricket. Is that the system which I found, natural law and constitutional law in cricket are very funny things. Very funny things because they are superseded by cricket rules instead of it being the other way around.
Yes.
Because the way that cricket runs and the understanding of how board and members' council works, it will always be whereby those are the superseding things. Whether something is legally right or wrong, if it goes down to a vote on anything, that's what is implemented. Whether it's against the law, whether anything else, that's what you then tend to find. And it became as a leader at Easterns, it was there's a say that I have that's been said: you wake up and you play Russian roulette every morning, because you never know which side is attacking, what's coming up, and what's that.
Sure.
Got appointed from 1st of November in 2019. And in that time, some of the things that I should have been able to, they say hindsight is 20/20. But reality is that you never get to see them because you're excited, you're the new CEO, and you're thinking, I've got these things that I want to implement.
You were CEO of Cricket South Africa?
No, Easterns. Easterns Cricket.
Okay.
So you are very excited and you're looking forward to implementing, because there were 3 mandates which were the board at the time gave me. They said they want to be commercially sound. I must be able to implement the Ngwepe findings, of which dealt with the facilities, and make sure that I deliver a good World Cup for the ICC Under-20 World Cup. That was my main objective that I got given, that said, short-term mandate, if I deliver those, then I'm a CEO in good standing. And the naive me believed in that. And as time went by, you learn other things, which then start with the first topic that I've got that says, my role as CEO being appointed there was something that was under question. Now, one of the things that came was that after going through the interview processes, I went through 2 interviews. The first one was in this building at CSA, which was chaired by the then president of Easterns Cricket, Mr. Peter Vonya. And he had a panel of independent people, which were majority not from the union. Had the interview, they called me back and said, you've made the shortlist, you are part of the top 3 that will be required to do a presentation to the board. Prepared a presentation, they gave me to say, look, make sure that it's commercially driven. With my background of coming from football in the commercial sector, I thought this is something that I could be able to do. Did a presentation, prepared one, did a presentation to the board, and I was then confirmed as the CEO of choice to the board. There's a report here in terms of the summary of how the process then went, but some of the things that you then get to find who was on the panel and who was supposed to be there. So that is how the interview process went. Then I started on the 1st of November on my side. Upon my arrival at Easterns, the HR manager / finance manager, Mr. Goodlove Poswa, informed me that because 20 days after, I think it was 20 plus days after I was appointed, there were new board members which were elected on the board, 4 to be exact. One of the board members the new board members that was coming on board was a gentleman by the name of Adrian Landsberg. Now, didn't know him from a bar of soap, so you welcome all the board members as the CEO. And Mr. Poswa alerted me that in his words says, Mr. Landsberg wanted your position. Please be aware that this is somebody who had interest in your position, but now he's my director, which means he's my superior. At the time, I didn't think anything untoward, and it became business as usual moving forward. And as time went by, I got to see, I mean, then you do your own, call it a desktop, just asking around. And I got to learn that he had applied for my position. This was not the first time that he applied within the union. He'd applied to be a director before, and unfortunately, because of the system, he hadn't made it onto the board. And this was the time that he was now on the board. But while he was doing this, it was something that he was, he even threatened to take the union to court in terms of my appointment because he didn't make the shortlisting on his side. So that was something that kind of got my ears perking up to say, okay, this could be something that I need to look out for. That was.
Did you come to understand why he thought you were not competent to be in the position to which you had been appointed? Quite apart from the fact that he may have thought that he was the one that ought to have got the position, but did we get to know at that stage or later on or subsequently what led to him believing that he deserved the position more than you?
He said that he's got a CV that is very good. He's very good in construction. He's got constructions company that are working, and his knowledge of the union. But even when he was challenging the board, it was before my appointment because the board went through, and in the document it states, the advocate, that how the process went to be. They did the first shortlisting. They did the first advert, and that's where his CV was. And then they were not happy with those CVs. I then entered in the second round when they were now opening it to everybody in terms of that. So he was more, not necessarily on me, but in terms of the process that he didn't get to make it. So it wasn't him saying my CV wasn't good enough. It was more him saying, how come he didn't make it?
Okay.
Yes. So that in the pack, in terms of the report that's prepared by People's Link, it takes you through the process of who were the people that were in the interviews, who were the people that were shortlisted, and in terms of the strategy that the board wanted. And from that, the union there was no objections in terms of my appointment, and the appointment went fine. Fast forward to now, the president at the time, Mr. Peter Vonya, then came to introduce me to the CEO of Cricket South Africa, which was Mr. Thabang More. Made a call and he said, look, I'd like to introduce you to the CEO of Easterns. And Mr. More he said to me, come through, let's talk. It was somebody that I was well acquainted with. It wasn't somebody that I was a stranger to. Because of obviously being in the sporting circles, you get to interact with quite a lot of people. One of the things that Mr. More said to me was, one thing that's important from them is because the union had just gone through quite a lot of transformation. And there was a sum of, which is what Ndate Tsoko spoke about, of 2 million, which the union had been told to put it aside, and is going to be able to improve the facilities of emerging clubs in terms of in the Easterns regions. Now, emerging clubs is what traditionally you would call your African clubs. So it's the likes of your Tembisa, your Davidton, Katlehong, Foslora. So that 2 million was set aside for that, to be able to say that 2 million needs to be able to do that. So in the first Judge Ngwepe report, it was said that CSA needs to oversee the process. The person who was in charge of that in terms of from Easterns was Ndate Tsoko in terms of a chairperson. He was one that would be then asked to oversee the process in terms of facilities. Reading the first Ngwepe report, I also learned that Adrian Landsberg then at the time also volunteered his service so that he can be able to go to help the clubs in terms of his knowledge and his contact, because he's a gentleman that's got quite a vast knowledge in terms of construction and cricket and everything that needs to be able to be that. So he was the one that was tasked by the report and in terms of agreement with CSA to be able to overlook the process. So Adrian was there, and then there was a gentleman at the time, he was co-opted on the board, but he's now the president of the union by the name of Tato Moagi. So Tato Moagi was between him and Adrian, they had to come back and give regular report to Members Council of the Union, to the Board of the Union, and to CSA in terms of making sure that all this process being overlooked by Emerging Club Chairperson bin Datetsuku on his side. So there was quite a bit of a shock on my side when I'm going, but Datetsuku, if you're asking where the 2 million rand is, and you were the one that was supposed to be aware of this process, there was supposed to be no cent that was spent. So that was an alarming thing to me. As time went by, the union had also made a proposal to the Lotto in terms of funding, in terms of assisting them in terms of the facilities that can be able to be there. The Lotto had granted the union 1.3 million, of which if you put the 1.3 million and you put the 2 million, then you've got quite a sizable amount of money which would then go to the unions, to the emerging clubs in terms of assisting them to get their facilities in order and being able to do that. Out of all that, the union then dispersed in what we termed the first rollout. There was 400,000 that was spent in terms of upgrading and refurbishing of facilities across Ekurhuleni at this emerging clubs on our side. So this was done in 2019, and this was before my arrival. So upon my arrival, this is still a burning issue that from the head office, being the office of Tabang as the CEO, there's a concern to say this project is taking too long. There's 2 million that's been set aside, there's 1.3 that we've got from the Lotto, and there's only 400,000 which has been spent on the project. That was the first rollout. It was also a concern to the then president, Mr. Peter Vonya, of which at a members' council meeting, of which we have I've given the document, it's a second document on that, whereby it also talks about him being irritated that this process is taking too long. Adrian, who is now a board member, and Tato, who's also now a board member, you've been tasked with doing this. How far along are you? When is the process going to be? Then they were to then make a presentation to the board and be able to do that to members' council. And not only to members' council, but also because according to the Ngwepe report, it's that we're supposed to then inform CSA of what we're doing, and that Datetsuku, as the chairperson of the Emerging Clubs Committee, was supposed to oversee the project. As time went by, it became clear that there were certain discussions that went on, and from Adrian's side and Tato's side, and it's also in the members' council minutes that I've provided. They had wanted to shift on how that money is now spent. Should it now be spent on a stadium, which is Willowmore Park, which the black clubs, which is the Emerging Committee, are now using? And that was something that became an issue because, for example, one of the biggest contributor in terms of players in Ekurhuleni, in terms of Easterns, is Davidton. But Davidton's got no facilities. They use the old tennis courts that are there. And you look at Tembisa. Ironically, Tembisa has the most people on the board of Easterns. So you've got Mam Faith, who comes from Tembisa. You've got the now president, who comes from Tembisa. And you've got Godfrey, who comes from Tembisa, but their facilities are still not being upgraded. Which, when you look at the development of a cricket player, you are expected to groom youngsters coming from the very same facilities to compete against who have first-class facilities, because not only because of the clubs have the facilities, but also the schools that these kids are going to are world-class. If a school starts with the name of Saint in front of it, it's kind of a given that they've got almost everything that you need to be able to get in terms of facility. So those were some of the things that the president, and he kept on it in terms of a members' council to say, we need to spend that money and be able to do that. And anybody can tell you, if you've got over 3 million, you can bargain with people. You can bargain with suppliers to be able to say, get me the following things, and being able to do that. So that money, the board never moved in terms of spending that money, the 2 million. And that money is now still sitting with the union. It's money that has never been spent. Even Datetsuku does not know about it as the chairperson of the Emerging Committee, and according to the Ngwepe report, is supposed to do that. the money has not been touched.
Mr. Sioko, why is there reluctance from the union, from the board, as you allege, to spend the money on emerging cricket clubs?
And I'll speak at a time when the then president, Peter Vonya, was still there. He was very passionate about that. But with everything, you can't, just because you're passionate does not mean then you get to sign off everything. It needs to be taken through quite a number of processes, because that money, if you're removing 2 million rand from the union's account, be it from investment, wherever it's going to be coming from, you need procedures to be able to do that. So that's why even at the time, they tasked the now President Tato Moahi and Mr. Landsberg in terms of saying, can you please make sure, get us the quotations from the right people? But they have now, since the direction has changed, because they're now saying, at the time they were saying, we now move in the money, instead of going and improving your facilities in the townships, in Tembisa, in Davidton, in Zagane, we now wanting to improve the main stadium, which is Willowmore Park. What did not make sense is that even from a CSA funding perspective, all stadiums, they get funding from that. But yet you're moving money for the underprivileged to be able to fund what is there. Yes, they play cricket at the stadium on a weekend basis because of the number of fields that you have. But surely, long-term vision is to be able to say, in the township where you live, you should be able to do that. And if you're going to be able to get to a point where you want to move and say, we have this proposal, there are processes and procedures that are supposed to be followed, because the Nwepe report and CSA have agreed to say, you need to be able to do this. Then go back and say, this is the proposal as a committee. This is what we, if the board agrees, the board will then take it to members' council, to the emerging committee, and then bring it to CSA. So CSA can also say, that is what is happening. But all that never happened, and the money is still sitting in the union's account. So those are some of the things that then become sad. But while the money for the clubs, the 2 million that has been set aside, or let me say the 3 million because of the lotto money that should be there, has been sitting there. The very same white clubs, if they want to have money, and currently there's a project whereby their facilities have been improved, there's 500,000 which the union and the board have approved to go improve the very same facilities. Now, I'll say from my side, and having seen them, you're now deciding, do you want to have soft things because you're moving your side screens, you're checking the grass, you're changing the rope, you're changing the covers. Now, those are soft things. To a cricketer, there are cricketers in the townships that don't have anything. They're training on tennis court, and yet you don't want to release their funding, but you're happy to release the soft, and I'm not saying it's soft stuff, but I'm terming it soft stuff because they've got the facilities, they've got everything, they've got the finances to be able to do that. Whereas the emerging market, the emerging clubs don't have anything. So, and it widens the gap in terms of the type of cricketers that you're going to be able to get. Because if you don't then improve the facilities where they have, how do you then, when you get to, and we'll go to extreme, when you get to where it's a national weeks, or there's trials, you expect the boy from Tembisa to compete against the boy from Kempton Park to Bedford View, Boksburg. Well, they're sitting with facilities that they have. That alone becomes a problem, because now when we go in to have a tournament of nationals, we're expecting you to go to a Saint school, without mentioning any other school, to now start learning how to bowl on that turf.
Yeah. If I may, Mr. Siopa, the complaints, as I understand them, are that they are largely based on lack of investment in facilities, with a number of teams under Easterns,
Yes.
not, or at least those facilities not reaching the intended beneficiaries. Your time as the CEO of Easterns, how did you deal with these issues? Because it would seem as if there is a period in which the complainants were alleging that the situation persisted even during your time.
Yes. Yes. So in that time, and I think the timeline is important. So I arrived on the 1st of November.
Yes.
And on this, the board pack that we've got in terms of a members' council meeting, That meeting was on the 17th of February. So it's within 4 months
What
of
year
me.
was this?
The meeting was held on the 17th of February 2020. So that's 4 months already. And just in terms of giving perspective, so in December in cricket would be your end of November to December, it would be your busiest time because you're having your national week. So your under 10, under 13, under 15, under 17, and under 19 go to different, wherever it's said to be in that year. So we all go in there. So that was the focus of that. And then on top of that, we still had a World Cup to deliver in terms of the ICC World Cup for the under-19s was now being held, and we were one of the venues in terms of that. Once that event then happened, you're now focusing on what is your bread and butter. And that's why it was discussed at the Members' Council meeting to say, this has not happened. How do we then do this? And it was something that on my side, first, because of the I wouldn't say pressure, but the being made aware by the CEO of Cricket South Africa at the time, Tabang Mure, was to say, we need this project to be able to happen. It then became an agenda item in terms of a members' council. And that's why the president then, Mr. Peter Vonya, said, Adrian Landsberg, who had volunteered himself to be part of this, along with Tato Moagi, who's now the president, were now tasked with make sure that this project moves forward. Find that, and there was a project whereby each of the club was supposed to send by information in terms of what their need analysis is to be able to say, how do we then do that? Unfortunately, as you look further down the line in 2020, then we had issues of COVID, so yes, which means most of the stuff had happened. But in terms of from a Mr. Vonya's side, it was something that he was hammering, and from a CEO's perspective, that's something that we were both saying, we need to be able to do that because we need to be able to, one, not only give feedback to the emerging clubs internally, we also need to give feedback to the mother body, which is CSA, because that is something that the Ngwepe report said you need to report back on that.
Yes. And how did you, given that you found the Ngwepe report there making those recommendations as to this is what should happen in relation to facilities, how did you guys then comply with it? Were you able to comply with the Ngwepe report, or were you in some way, were your efforts, undermined? If so, by who and in what way?
So in terms of the Ngwepe report, which is, and I'll always say the second Ngwepe report, because there's two Ngwepe reports, yes, of which we will go into. It was to be able to say there's a need analysis that needs to happen. Then Mr. Tato Moagi, the now president, and Adrian Landsberg, who's now a board member, they then wanted to move that funding to be able to go to the improvement of the stadium. That is a diversion that then requires the different bodies to be able to sit.
Okay. So
that is the big part of, you're given the task to be able to say, find the need analysis of the clubs. But their recommendation is not, this is what the clubs need. Their recommendation is, let's move where we can improve the facilities at Willowmore. So that is where then it becomes a loggerhead thing, because my response was, okay, if we do these things, we then need to alert the necessary bodies in terms of being able to be there. One being the emerging clubs, two being CSA itself, and Members' Council itself in terms of from an instance perspective, because that money was set aside specifically to be able to improve or acquire, if land acquiring or leasing, whatever the case may be, to be able to go to the clubs. That's where then the process starts. What will happen, and then as we carry forward with this conversation, you'll see, then when things then move, and that's why I say, whenever you get to a board discussion and any other event that happens, you always need to be able to have the numbers in any board meeting or any members' council structure, because if something is put down to a vote, you need to be able to have the numbers that then says either go ahead or don't go ahead. I'm not sure if I'm answering you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then I'll go to my next topic, which is the red flags that I should have been able, that were there for everybody to see.
Before you move to that, Mpo, Just in terms of facilities, the Willowmore Stadium, how accessible is it to players or young players in the townships?
Accessibility in terms of, it depends where you're coming from. If you're coming from Davidton, you probably have to take one taxi, which would drop you off there. But there are certain things that then become an hindrance. There is no taxi that moves directly from Tembisa to Willowmore, to Benoni. So you need to go from Tembisa to Kempton Park, from Kempton Park to Benoni.
Sure. And how much would, on an average, how much would that cost?
Sheesh. So one trip would say about 45 Rand. So as much as CSA Advocate may give you traveling money and transport money, there are certain things that you've got to take into consideration. Let's take today. Today is a school day. So kids get out of school 2:30, 3 o'clock. If your training is at 4:30, and having grown up in a township, I'll tell you this for free, there's no taxi that's just waiting for you to say, hurry up quickly. Tauta is going to stop at every... So by the time you get to training, if training starts at 4, it's 4:30, 4:45, which means you're already late for your own training session. But also the flip side of it, and having been, and I'm grateful to have the parents that I have that worked as hard as they did to try and get me to school, even when you're coming back, a cricket bag is quite large.
Yes.
You're now going home, you're a 10-year-old. Cricket bag that big. You're now sitting at a taxi rank. You're now sitting with us who are coming from work on a queue that is long. Not only, and I'll take Tembisa. So you're sitting there to be able to get a taxi from Benoni to go to Kempton Park. When you get to Kempton Park, there's another queue of people that's now sitting, waiting to go back home. What time do you get home?
Sure.
Would it not be better for that money to be invested in Tembisa, whereby you can probably take one taxi to be around? So you have a problem, you get in there, you're going to be late, given. Number 2, going back home, you're going to be late, and you still have schoolwork to do. Because one of the biggest thing, if you having listened to the minister when it was here, the same learner that the Department of Education looks after, it's the same learner that the Department of Sport needs to look after. Because he still needs to do his homework, he still needs to do all those things. So it then becomes a problem to say, is it viable for kids to be traveling that much? Now let's take that and do a direct comparison. Now you've got a kid that's in Boksburg, that's in Benoni, that's in Bedford View. Father picks them up at 2:30, goes home, grabs something to eat. At 4 o'clock, takes them to training. And father picks them up.
And training, all those was in the neighborhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's within a 10-minute, 15-minute. So by doing that, already before you've even gotten out of the starting blocks of being a cricketer, you're already disadvantaged. We haven't even gone at looking at the equipment and every other thing. Just on you getting to the pitch for training is already a problem. So those are some of the things that this money would be able to do it. And according to the Ngwepe report, this is what it's supposed to do. If you're from Tembisa, train in Tembisa. If you from Davidton, train in Davidton. So those are some of the things that then become that funding that was there. You now have 2 individuals who are now the leaders on the board, but are saying, let the money move away. But it's still, the question then I beg to is to say, and as I advise, we need to take it through the right process to be able to get back to the mother body and say, we heard the Ngwepe report. If we're disregarding, and here are our reason, and this is what we would like to use the funding for. But the same counterpart being your premier clubs, which are your predominantly white clubs, they're able to have those facilities, and you as the union are still able to get to a point where you help them in terms of getting the facilities. But yet you don't want to help the black clubs. And I'll go back to what Ntate said when he was here. It's one of the things, Advocate and the team, it would be, when you look at in terms of the chairperson or that become the club's chairperson from Tembisa, they also have the same problems because when the meetings are in the evenings, they are unable to get there themselves. And once they get there, unfortunately, English is not a medium that everybody's comfortable in conversing with. So when these issues are burning, and if I feel passionate about it, anybody that knows I feel passionate about it, I'm going to stand my ground. You're going to say Mpo 1, and I'll say, but I think 3 is better. And now you're going forth, and this somebody is not comfortable in English. And then it becomes they give up the fight without having gone any further in terms of making sure that that's that. And that's what's happening, because the majority of the people that would be on the board who are supposed to make decisions that are about the betterment of cricket are not doing that for them. Even when there is an independent body as the Ngwepe inquiry that has come back with recommendation, and the mother body is supposed to implement them, and the mother body has literally not done anything to make sure that that moves forward. So in terms of the red flags being the next topic, was that because the 1.3 from the lotto and the 2 million, upon my arrival, I'd found out the first phase rollout was 400,000, which had already been used. And this is what became an issue of contention for me, was that the rest of the lotto money, which should be obviously 400,000, it's a round figure, it should be, let's say you've got about 900,000 or so, also. That 900,000 was now being used for cash flow for the union. Now, there's a couple of things. There are principal matters and there are legal stuff. If you go to the lotto and request money from the lotto, and you're saying, I am going to empower and I'm going to help infrastructure, you can use it for cash flow. And my issue as the CEO was that my signature is going to be the one that sits on that, and I'm the one that has signed away to say that has. Because if an audit comes, because it happened in the previous CEO, but now I'm now the CEO, any financials that come, I'm signing it off. There's a saying, so they can fetch me 10 years from now and say, Mr. Siopa, you signed away the money, you've agreed to that. But Lotto also is awaiting a report from Easterns, because if we give you the money as the Lotto, you should be able to account for the money and tell us how far the projects are. And that is something that hasn't been done. So those are some of the things that then became an issue with me, that you then starting to have this quarrel with the board and saying, but this, the Lotto money. Adrian, Tato, as much as you want to defer this money to be able to do that, how do we then make sure that that's been able to do that? And in all this process, the emerging committee, which Ntatetsuko and Dinesh are part of it, so they should know, they should be kept abreast on the happenings in terms of that. And it's something that, again, has been reported to Members' Council and has been there. But unfortunately, as the accounting officer, as the head accounting officer of the union, I sign it away, then it's me who has then been able to do that. I'm now liable because of the position that I hold within the union. So that's what, you can't allow a process whereby certain members of the board, and due to the majority that they have on the board, have moved to say the money has been moved, part of the Lotto has now been used for cash flow, which legally is wrong. Lotto doesn't allow for that. If you don't use it, you need to be able to, at any time if a Lotto has an audit, should be able to say, this is the bank account, this is where the money is sitting, but this is the progress that's happening. One, you're not able to give the Lotto progress. Two, you're not doing what you've applied to be able to do. And now, for me, and that was a personal one, because I'm now expected to sign it off.
So you signed it off?
No, it was those financials. By the time that they came, my signature, there is no signature where my signature is there.
Okay, what I see as well here from your submission is that you seem to, I think more than anything, the Ombudsman's concern about, it would seem as if all of these issues with the Easterns, they somehow affected the way in which the game is delivered to communities. And I will ask you this, given that you were there, how is that, first, I've gone through your statement, the infighting, the disagreements, the suspensions of people, within the system, how has that improved? How has that contributed to the game of cricket? In terms of reaching to the areas it is intended to reach, it is supposed to reach.
It's never going to reach there. That's a long and short answer of it. Because what it is, through you, Chair, is that you then have whenever, because of, and numbers mean a lot, because when you sit at a board, if there's 5 people and we say let's put it to a vote, even if there's a dissenting voice, you'll be outvoted, but you still have to implement the decision of the majority. So with that being said, if the majority is comfortable at taking away 2 million that was meant for that, you can't now go and say, no, but I don't feel like it. You have to implement the decisions of the majority, because that's how process works. But if you are then to be the voice that then rises and says, but 1, 2, and 3, we did not follow process and procedure. And I'll show you through the submission. There was a gentleman who was a board member by the name of Tota Tsotsoto. He raised these issues to say, financially, we're not a sound union. There are irregularities that are happening. And in his words, he said, Mr. Goodlove Poso, as a finance manager, is incompetent. But because that's a gentleman that then falls in part of the majority of the board, it used to be known that the board will protect him. And it becomes the issue, no, we will then get to a point whereby, and as it happened, which led to the second Wepe report, let's then remove him. So instead of then addressing the issues that are on the table, it then becomes issues of, no, we will remove you because you are the one that is now a problem. And even it's in the very same minutes of the 17th of February. After a board meeting that had happened in January, it was decided that they should be, and the board voted on this unanimously, and they said, Tota should move from being a director and move to being a consultant within the union, because he's a finance guy. I mean, he works with reputable companies in terms of what he's doing, the investment companies globally known. He then came back with a report. And the very same board then said his report should not be made out to the rest of members' council. They stopped his report from being given to members' council. So he went to a meeting and he said, because at this members' council on the 17th, he said, we've got issues. Members said, go find the issues. We've now given you mandate to be a consultant. When he then comes and he then says to the board, and he reports back to the board, because members' council doesn't sit the same time as the board, so the board will sit before a members' council. The board said they don't want that report to be released. My question was, Mr. Tsotsoto, as a consultant, the union has paid him to consult. And his report, regardless of however it is, it's something that should be reported upon. But the board decided, and again, it boils down to majority on the board. The board then says, no, you can't release that report. Till today, that report has not been released. Members' council, and I hope when Easterns come, they can say whether they have allowed everybody else to be able to have that. It's something that they have stopped because of having majority on the numbers. Now, those were some of the things that, even though you may have, like you asked, what have I done? And
Yes.
I'm an individual. If my boss says, here's a resolution, I don't have the power to be able to think on my own, because I'm implementing what the board would like me to be able to do.
Yes, and one of the resolutions, if I capture your testimony properly,
Yes.
was the diversion
Yes.
of the funds
Yes.
from reaching from reaching the facilities, or actually taking care of the facilities
Yes.
that for which the funds were intended. They were diverted to something else.
Ironically, there's no resolution to that.
Okay.
But if you debate about it long enough, and then COVID then happens, you will never, because there's still that debate of what do we do with it. And then time goes, then we were now sitting at level 5 in terms of lockdown.
Yes.
But ever since then that has happened, that money has not been moved. And my biggest gripe then turns out to be, how can you then move and say two things? You're now moving the money that was for black clubs, you're moving them to improve the stadium, which gets funding from the mother body. And then you still be able to say a large amount of 500,000, you move it to improve the facilities. So maybe the grass wasn't cut low enough, maybe wanted to be cut lower. It's a different conversation to a Davidton, to a Katlehong, which don't have the facilities.
And they never got the
They
facilities
never got.
despite that funding.
Despite that funding being there,
available.
despite the funding that was said to be, it must be able to go on to that.
Okay.
So that is that. So in that infighting, the people who've suffered is the have-not. Muto will suffer because of the infighting that has happened. And that's what has happened.
Yes.
So, and in my submission, I asked again, what was the process to be followed in terms of diverting of the fund? Was that process followed? And was CSA informed? Because CSA is the one that that had the first and second WEPA report.
Yes.
Were they kept away? And the answer is no. Because if there's any communication that goes to CSA, it would come from two people, either the president or the CEO. And none of us had actually given any feedback to CSA to say this is where the fund have been diverted to. And along with that, which takes me to my third point, which is operational staff. Based on the report given by Date Tsotso in terms of having said that the staff, and he was very clear on where the problems were. He said the finance manager, who is also the HR manager, Mr. Goodlove Poswa, and our cricketing services manager being Leonard Rajagapal, who were the two most senior guys in terms of the union, were not the best to have in terms of where they have. He called them incompetent in terms of doing that. But because along with that, the union had also had a what you call a CSA loan of 17.5 million. And in that 17.5 million, which was meant to improve the stadium, how that money was handled, it's something that's still a misery to, not a misery, but a mystery to us. Because you're sitting and you're going, now one thing where I came from football. And having worked with two of the largest teams in South Africa, one being Kaizer Chiefs, the other being Mamelodi Sundowns, and having worked around the World Cup time, you get to know what FIFA wanted. So I would just, if you were put on the light, I'll tell you this is what is supposed to happen, this is how the lights are meant to. There was a game that was happening at Willowmore, and the night before, I remember saying to Frosty, these lights, can we test and see what they look like? And I said, no man, these lights have got blind spots. Because according to if you do the lighting system is that if you put 3 pylons on this side, the opposite side is supposed to be there so that they counter each other. But even when you look at how the money was spent in terms of being able to do that, the tendering process, when you ask the questions, what had happened, who had done that? And these are the questions that us now sitting with Mr. Tsotso, we were asking, what had happened? And we're reporting back to the board. And the board was, no, you should let it go.
Now, if I were, because I've looked at the Ngwepe reports some time ago, and he raised a lot of issues.
Yes.
You know, lack of transformation and how transformation is undermined by a failure to make provision and take care of the facilities. And now that it's 2 reports, and I think the last one, you'll correct me, was in 2018. I can't remember.
No, the first one was in 2018 going into 2019.
Okay.
And then the second one was in 2020.
Yes. Now, the issues raised by Judge Ngwepe, have those issues, as we speak today, been, have they been addressed? Because it seemed to be structural issues and the infighting.
So what would happen?
And as I understand it, you were there after the second report by Mr. Ngwepe, Judge Ngwepe.
So here are the problems that then come. Because one of the issues, and I think you've heard me refer to, if you have numbers on the board, it then becomes that. Even in one of my submissions, just to illustrate that point. So because Mr. Peter Vonya, Mr. Tota Tsotso, and myself, we are now seen as the resistance in terms of why are we pressing these issues in terms of being able to be forward. I remember Mr. Digambia, ironically, I was laughing when he was here. It was and not because it was funny, because I was introduced to Mr. Digambia by Adrian Landsberg. And when we spoke, he was somebody that seemed very keen in terms of moving forward transformation. And as things were now headed to a heat, and this was around March going into April, I got a very strange call which said, Mbo, as the CEO, who do you side with? My standard response was, I'm a CEO to everybody. Whether there are political issues at whatever level it is, I still have to be the CEO to everybody. I'm not interested in the political fighting. I've got to make sure that my operational stuff works fine. So all that has led to whereby, and there are things that happen, and I'll give you an example of which is in my report. In the World Cup, Easterns, after the World Cup, we got a letter from the now acting, he was then the acting CEO of Cricket South Africa, Dr. Jacques Fall, who said Easterns played the Cricket World Cup without a grading certificate, of which by law, a grading certificate, you need an engineer from the city, and the city can be the only ones that give you that certificate. Move forward, it meant that we shouldn't have hosted the World Cup. You have now, on a risk perspective, you were to do a risk analysis, you had national teams from other countries that were coming that we were hosting. And you've exposed them to a stadium that is substandard because you don't have a grading certificate, because we failed that grading certificate. Now, CSA has now, because it was a prerequisite of hosting the World Cup. I then get that, and then they then say, take DC issues. Then I moved forward to suspending the head of cricket servicing, who was in charge of the process, being Mr. Leonard Rajakapol. The board was at mayhem. Reported back to them, guys like Tato Moahi, Adrian Landsberg, and Data even said they will testify against the union in terms of making sure that Leonard is still on the job. DC process went fine. Got an independent chairperson to come and sit, and the process was then followed. The process found him guilty. The recommendation of the chairperson was a dismissal. Needless to say, Mr. Leonard Rajakapol still works for Easterns, because the board then had a vote whereby they're now saying, what are we going to do? And they voted that he stays on. Now, you broke the law of the land because in December of 2019, we hosted England for those games. Those are world champions. That's an ICC #1 team at the moment. We hosted the World Cup in the stadium that is substandard, because if anything happens from a legal perspective and an insurance perspective, the first document that they will ask you is the SASRIA grading certificate. And you show, letter came from Cricket South Africa, and it's part of one of the documents in my submission, including the findings under Leonard's process in terms of how it was done. The board then went against, and anybody that testified against Leonard either got a warning or has been dismissed, because the board deemed it fit that he must still carry on. Now, when those things happen, you then ask yourself, do they want what's best for the union? Or is it because of a cabal that is supposed to be protected? So in terms of that, which leads us to the second Weber report, then Mr. Adrian Landsberg write accusation letters in terms of charges that he will then charge Mr. Tota Tsotsozo, Peter Vonya, and this is in a process where he now wants to remove them on the board. Now, that process was flawed in quite a number of ways. Our MOI says if you're going to call a meeting and it's not called by either the CEO or the president, you need 4 other directors to be able to call that meeting. That didn't happen. It was something that was also in the Weber report. So that's, and then with that being said, according to law, and you guys are more learned in law matters than me, I may be better at sports, but you guys are better legal heads than me. The onus lie on the accuser to prove his accusation. Those accusations never at any time were they proven. This is
Yes. Now, these issues that you are raising, remember, there are terms of reference
yes,
here that
Yes.
the ombudsman must, whatever evidence has been tendered here, must conform or must respond to the terms of reference. You know, other than the question of facilities, which I've captured from your submission
Yes.
to be that they never went to the intended beneficiaries. How are these other issues helpful in the ombudsman achieving the mandate set out in the terms of reference?
So how that will be, because it's also important to say, and this will show different processes that are going on to halting transformation on the site. Because one of the things goes back to, and I think it was Ntate Tsugu, he spoke of a youngster that played all weekend and only got to bowl, and I think it was 2 overs. And that is how, because you've now moved on to the senior team. Now, what it is, and in one of the packs, you've got what we call P13 and P14 submissions in terms of from a Cricket South Africa perspective, which gives you the transformation targets of what you're supposed to do, who's supposed to be playing, and who's supposed to do that. One of the committees that one is supposed to have is called Playing Affairs Committee. Now, Playing Affairs Committee will give you terms of reference to the coach and the team to be able to say who's chosen, how many players of color are supposed to be in the team, how many of those things. There's supposed to be a committee that is supposed to do that within every single union to make sure that transformation is moved forward. At Easterns, because of the infighting and the removal of people, that committee does not exist. So you're now relying on individuals to be able to say, if Advocate Ntsebeza likes you, you are in the team. If you like me, I'm in the team. So that I'll give an example with the current team. One of the mandates from Cricket South Africa is that Playing Affairs Committee is supposed to be working with the coach to get the target that they've set for transformation. Easterns does not have that. So who are they going to be able to give them that? Who chooses the team? This current team, which is playing now, that process was headed by Mr. Adrian Landsberg. It's not a Playing Affairs Committee. There are emails and tons of them which can show even today that the Playing Affairs Committee does not exist. So if it says, supposed to have Playing Affairs Committee, supposed to have a coach, there was no coach at the time because Eastern said the board had dismissed the coach. But the board is the one that chooses the team. By Cricket South Africa standards, you're not supposed to have that. So what will happen is that then it will be people of who knows who. I like you, I can come and call you. And even in that, because transformation and my understanding of transformation is supposed to create an equal platform for everybody. You're not supposed to be having whereby, because now you're going within the black community, you're just saying, I'm doing a tick box exercise because I've picked Advocate Dumisa to be able to come and do that. Is she the best in that position? And if she's not, and because of the happenings at the board, whereby for 2 years, yes, for 2 years in terms of Easterns, the P14, we found that we don't have committees. And CSA knows about that. And while those committees are not there, who suffers? The players that, terms of reference that are supposed to be given to a coach on how you choose players to play for your senior team, which is the platform where you can now be able to then progress and be able to get to national level. So, but you have a board member in Adrian Landsberg who's now heading the process. On what basis? What's his terms of reference that he's using to choose a team? You don't have a coach, and you don't have a Playing Affairs Committee, but the team is being signed off. So you then going, in doing that, when there was somebody who was the president at the time, who was saying, this is the process to be followed. When you had a Tota Tsotsotso who was saying, these are the financial ways that you're meant to be able to do. But because they were not part of the cabal that you form part of, you opted to have them removed. In a process that the second Mwepe report, Judge Mwepe says, but how do you, Adrian, be able to do that? Because you wrote the charges. You sit and chair the meeting that removes the person. So you're not independent of that process. I can't accuse you and chair the meeting that accuses you and then come back and say, no, I'm removing you. There must be somewhere where then, here are my accusation. Natural law says, prove your accusation. I don't need to prove it. And one of the things which was a big surprise to me at that meeting, because now you're the CEO, you still have to have the meeting because the board has said so. There was a question after the voting of the removal of the president that happened that Adrian asked one of the then board members, Yanni. He said to Yanni, as per our discussion about you being president, how do you feel about that? Why that question was alarming to me, it means that you guys have had a meeting before this to say we're removing this guy without doing this, but you've discussed who you would like as your presidential option. You didn't follow process. Process says you're the accuser, and Judge Mwepe says this in the second Mwepe report where he says, your charges started off on 8. By the time you go to the end, you've got 12 charges. Half of those charges, going back to my first point of the CEO's appointment, are based on the CEO. Mr. Adrian Landsberg, are you not conflicted? But because you've got people who have the numbers in terms of the board, so you're now saying operationally you will suffer because you now have incompetent people that you've kept on the board in terms of heading your structures. You've kept incompetent people there because you don't want to be able to move them because they're part of your group. But you've also removed a coach who you have never given terms of reference. It's one thing if I say, coach, these were terms of reference. You don't have enough transformation players. We gave you this. We gave you this. You didn't do that, but yet you are able to say to the coach, you're not transforming. And I've had that conversation with the then coach, Richard. And Richard, and I'll say this, Richard is one of the best coaches. If someday, and I'm not shocked that he's now going to the World Cup with Namibia as a coach.
Richard who?
Richard Dasnevs. I'm not shocked that he's going to the World Cup with Namibia, the T20 World Cup with Namibia, because he's very methodical. My question to him was, Richard, how are you choosing your team? What is your criteria? And his first answer, he came back to me, he said, Mr. CEO, this is what CSA gives us, and I choose this team based on what CSA gives us. But if the board was a functional board, they would have said, we would like you to choose youngsters that are from around here. We would like you to choose youngsters from this township. Here are terms of reference that you can be able to use along with your playing committee to be able to choose this team. Then you can be able to say, coach, we gave you 2019 to choose this team. But you didn't.
Yes.
But if you don't have that, and he's using the one from Cricket South Africa, how do you come back and say he's not a transformed coach? He's using the mother body because of lack of terms of reference in terms of being able to do that.
From his board.
And when you now, they would like you, and this is one of the things to say, when you then move, and this is when it then becomes complex, because over time then you then realize that Mr. Landsberg's got a son who is now eligible to be at the senior team. Mr. Landsberg has written a number of letters to the senior coach in terms of saying, why is my son not part of the team? And I mean, I remember there was an exercise which Richard did. He chose the youngsters based on the numbers that they give at club level in terms of weekend. I think it was 15 or 16. In those 16 youngsters, one didn't show up on the day. I think he was sick or something. And they did the drills that are normally your drills that you do for cricket. So it's your skills training, it's your fitness training. And out of the 15, Mr. Landsberg came 14th. His son came 14th. And to Richard, and Richard is and I always say, he's very methodical, he's a fitness-orientated coach. He says, but he doesn't make it. But Mr. Landsberg is now the boss in terms of the top. Now the coach, and this is how the board then affects that. The coach has been dismissed by the union. Is it a coincidence that Mr. Landsberg was part of the people that were running that? I don't think so, because he has shown that he's disgruntled with that, and everybody that has been disgruntled against any opinion that he's put to the table has now had to leave the union because of that's where he is. And that's how the dysfunctionalities of the board has led to why now players are chosen into the team, because he's now part of the selection team. He's a de facto selector, whereby he's chosen the team, he's done those things, and anybody that does not move forward in terms of moving that has now moved to whereby we're able to have that. Now, one of the things that is a big problem for me, which moving to our beloved mother body, from a CSA's perspective, these are not breaking news that they didn't know they were happening.
I mean, hence I remember I said to you that, remember the Judge Ngwepe reports, they are shared with CSA, isn't it?
But who instructs Judge Ngwepe, or who commissions Judge Ngwepe?
Isn't it CSA?
It is CSA. So you've got two Ngwepe report which tells you of the irregularity. Okay, one gives you a blueprint of what you're supposed to follow in terms of saying, here's 2 million, plus you've got the lotto money. You then say CSA is aware because they're sitting with the Ngwepe reports.
Yes.
The dysfunctionalities of the board through the very same CSA project processes of P13 and P14. They're giving you that this union, as it sits, they don't have functioning committees which are very key in terms of giving terms of reference, in terms of be it coaching, be it finance, be it everything else. For 2 years, you still don't have that. But CSA has said and withheld the money. And yet, they do nothing. So if, for example, and I'll put it to you this way, if, for example, let's say we say Peter Vonya, as the then president, was the man that was not responsible in terms of keeping the union in good standing, he's now left. 2 years after that, you still have the same problems that are happening within the union, whereby you still don't have the committees that are able to do that. And CSA, through that process, knows what is happening. Through the two Ngwepe reports, CSA is very much aware of what's happening. And the third one was that as a CEO, I wrote 2 grievances that I wrote to say there's financial mismanagement in terms of the lotto, because by law, the lotto can be able to do that. They can come and, whenever you see one of those golfs that got a bird on it, it's never a good thing. They're not coming to check on your weather. So I didn't want to be where I'm sitting now. I'm being arrested because something that has happened. But also, one of the things was that while this is happening, CSA said, you hosted a World Cup with a grading certificate that is non-existent with a substandard stadium. Tell us what's happening. It's a fourth thing that CSA knows. And it's not as if it were, I emailed the then chairperson of the Audit and Risk, and Mr. Marius. Acknowledgement was there. We have seen your email. Please keep the proof. What has happened? So, and that's why I say, because people have got majority on boards, they can vote. Things that supersede the law, you can use lotto money for any other thing, it's okay. You can choose not to follow the Ngwepe recommendations and take the 2 million and use it elsewhere, it's okay. Because you've got what? You've got the majority of the board. Who suffers? For 3 million, if you say to me, Mpo, here's 3 million now, take it to the clubs, I can be able to say, there will be, all those clubs can be able to get pitches, can be able to get nets, because I will go and bargain. That's a business thing where you can be able to bargain. But because CSA did not do that, and they were aware because they were the ones that started the processes, what does it say? Does the mother body not care? Is the mother body interested in transformation? Those are the questions that you then raise. Because all those things were reported to CSA. All those things, it was under CSA processes. But the black child will suffer because that's what they are. And as one of my parting things is to be able to say, the board will move forward to reward you if you support them, even though there's irregular things that happen.
Okay.
If you back them through any fight that they have, they'll back you. Mr. De Gambia, who was here, is a very close friend of Adrian, Landsberg, and Tato Moahi. His son has just been hired to head part of the development of the union. His name is Carl De Gambia. He's now been hired to be at the union. There was a chairperson who's a very close friend. He was then a chairperson of Kwatema, Tapelo Ditle, who was, when we went to Members' Council, backed Adrian, Tato, and Data in terms of what they're doing. He's been hired to be a coach of the girls' team. And a gentleman who is now a board member by the name of Godfrey Hlengane. He's now a board member, but his brother is now is a coaching manager at the union. I don't think, I know it's not a coincidence that these people have. It can be people that come from the same grouping of people. And if you remember in one of my statements, and I said, Tembisa, which has no facilities whatsoever, has got 3 people on the board. Yes, yet, one would think, I grew up in Katlehong. If I have 3 people on the board, better make sure that Katlehong is going to be one of the places that's human nature that you'll be able to try improve where you're from. But Tembisa, which sits, and these are people who are from that area, yet development in that area is not moving forward. But yet people within there are the people that are looked after because they're not looking out for players. They're not looking out for cricket. They're not looking out for the betterment of cricket in the area. They're looking out for one's interest. It is also one of the things that when you then look at it, you then say, like I said, Adrian's son, Karl Landsberg, is eligible to be part of the senior team. The previous coach had said to him that you're not good enough to be able to make it. He went to Mpumalanga, he tried other, he still didn't make it. But after this whole process of moving the coaches, getting another coaches, he's now back in the system, whereby he's now part of the Calls team. And that Call team is the very same team that for the next coming season, everybody looks at to be able to choose and promote those players. Angpula Matambo, I'm not a Sangoma, but I wouldn't be shocked if that son is now part of the senior team. So, and in concluding and say part of my recommendations, my proposal, the law is something that we should all respect. When we get to lotto funding, it's not our money that we can play with. That 1.3 million could have gone somewhere. The union chose to use it as cash flow.
Yes.
Lotto still does not have a report. And it is something that through CSA's own processes of P13 and P14, it's been said that the board is dysfunctional because they don't have the committees, and it's a requirement from the mother body. Yet for 2 seasons you don't have it, yet you do nothing as the mother body. And through the 2 Mwepe reports, which were independent report of a reputable somebody who sat and went through the processes, he gave you the blueprint of funding that is supposed to go and say, transformation, here's 2 million. That has now been moved somewhere else. And through another process by the illegal removing of directors has told you that the processes were illegal, that board members were conflicted, and CSA has gone and done nothing. Eastern's played a World Cup without a grading certificate, which is the law of the land under SASRIA requires you to have if you have any stadiums. You don't have. And when I took DC processes against the person who did that, you then stop them. You then stop me from carrying forward that process, and you protect the person, even though the recommendations of the chairperson of the DC is a dismissal, and you said you're testifying against your own company in terms of keeping somebody who is incompetent. That in my world, I don't know how that works. And when you have numbers on the board and those numbers are not serving the union, and I think this is one of the things that was a shock to me. When there was a vote that was meant to have the removal of the president and the director, one of the board members, Mum Faith, was in hospital at the time. To show you the lengths that people will go to. People went to hospital to get a proxy from her to be able to vote somebody out. meaning her health did not matter. What was important was to be able to get to a point where we can be able to vote somebody out. If I'm in hospital, I would like to think that that's enough for me to be able to say, I'm sick. But for somebody to go and get a proxy letter in hospital and being able to do that, you've got people who are, and as Judge Mwepe said, who are colluding, who's the team, who's operational staff, who's the board members, and CSA keeps quiet. Is our mother body concerned about this? It's not stuff that they don't know. I, as the CEO, have written 2 letters, which they were acknowledged to say there's financial mismanagement, there's board issues that are, the board is dysfunctional, and they've acknowledged those letters, and yet they've done nothing. The question I ask, does CSA care? Because clearly the board, we've seen that they're not interested in transparency and being able to do that. If they were, the committees would have been functional by now. The committees are not. And the proof is the CSA P14 that says the board is not. You've now risked kids' lives. You've now risked the reputation of the country as a cricketing country by hosting England, the World Cup team, in a stadium that's substandard, but you're willing to protect other people while you're at it. So those are the things that, for me, from my side, and as a parting shot, ke kgopela lefeng batho ba bantsho 2 million ya bona. Because that's what they have, that's what the judge has recommended and everybody has agreed. Can we not improve the facilities so that we can be able to have these black kids in the township be on the same footing with their counterparts?
Yeah. I don't think we can improve on that. Sorry. On the way.
Mr. Siopa, sorry about that, Mr. Siopa. From an administrative point of view, what changes do you think need to happen, within the union itself and just in with cricket, within the cricketing structures in general?
The first one that I'd say is that the board at Eastern's Union has shown that they're not capable of in terms of self-correcting. You've had Judge Mwepe who's given you an independent process because he doesn't side with anybody. He's a reputable former judge who's able to do that. He's given you that in terms of the blueprint of what you're able to do. He's alerted you of the dysfunctionality and the conflict that the members have in terms of the board, and they've done nothing. There's financial mismanagement that is happening, and the board perpetuates it. Within the CSA MOI, the best thing, according to me, would be administration, because CSA will then appoint an administrator who then looks after Easterns, along with administrative staff that's able to do that. Because if I, as the CEO, can't even do DC hearings for the staff, and you as the board are now interfering, the DC came, and it's one of the things that they said here. The chairperson said, out of 7 charges which Leonard was charged with, 5 he was found guilty on. And you as the board are now saying, no, I'll go against the very same board that I serve and say this person must stay. And everybody was overruled because you've got the numbers in the board. Do you have the best interest of the union at heart? During the World Cup, I had a mantra because we had students that were coming in. And the staff would tell you, I said, the MEC of Education in Gauteng, Honorable Mr. Panyaza Lusufi, if ever there's a problem, wherever there is, you will hear that he's driving there. And my call was, he's not coming to visit me because there's an irregular thing that has happened. But yet we didn't have a grading certificate. We've put lives of children at risk because we had a substandard stadium. And the board perpetuated that by saying this person should not be dismissed even after the findings. So administration for me would be the best thing. A forensic investigation would be required at Easterns because of finances, because people would need to be looking at the finances and being able to do that. And allow independent people to have to do that. Because even if you look at the suspensions that I've had within Easterns, ironically, it was Mr. Adrian Landsberg who wrote that, the very same conflicted one on my appointment. He wrote the charges, He's the one that presented them. He's the one that finds the company that should be able to do that. And he says, no, he doesn't have any ill intentions towards me, because if he means well and that's what he's done in terms of the last time that he's been there, I would hate to see what he can do when he's really angry or trying to get me, because he was responsible for the charges against the president, against Tota Tsotsotso. He chaired the meeting. He was responsible for my charges. He chaired, and he was the lead person in terms of so every single process, it's him. When does he actually sit back and say, let the process run without me? If I accuse you, Konamanje Advocate, I need to allow the process to say, here are my charges, here's my proof. An independent chairperson will sit to allow the process to be. But this person is now, you accuse the president, you want him to be dismissed, you chair the meeting in which he's supposed to be dismissed, and at some point, you can't have those as the people that are the ones that are running. And because they've got the numbers, they're the ones that would run it. Then you need people who actually have the best intentions of the union to be able to run the union. And administration would be my recommendation. A forensic investigation would be something that I'd then be able to do that. And my plea, give the emerging clubs their 2 million and the lot of money that is on there, that none. You can't improve what's already improved, because it widens the gap in terms of the sport. Because these kids don't have the facilities near them. It disadvantages them as kids, as learners, because if he's at training, it means his homework is not done. Tomorrow, the following morning is that. Whereas their counterparts are progressing in life, we keep moving forward. The gap between the haves and the don't-haves keeps getting bigger. So that's why I would recommend an administration and a forensic investigation into the union.
Well, I suppose that's a note at which we could end the proceedings today. But it is food for thought, because quite clearly it should inform and shape our report. I get worried, yeah? There was Nicholson, there was Mwepe, and now there is this process. And I ask myself, what more wisdom does Cricket South Africa need when there is such a wealth of precedent by way of analysis of what the wrongs are and by way of recommendations as to how we deal with the wrongs that there are. But year after year, there doesn't seem to be any progress. In fact, when I was being interviewed yesterday, that's one of the questions that were put to me by one of the interviewers. What do you think, Ntsebeza, you are going to bring which is better than that which was brought to bear on the problems in cricket by others? It's not as though this is the first of its kind, that there is a probe into the issues that you are mandated to look into. And quite frankly, it's one of the questions that give me sleepless nights, because the more I reflect, not only on what the Mwepes and the Nicholsons and everybody else has done, but at the 30 years from 1991, when there were unity talks, and then there was the union, and we still are here, 30 years after union, pondering over the same things that had triggered the union in the first place. There was a commitment at that stage. Look, these structures, one for Africans, one for colours, one for Indians, one for white people. It's crazy. Let's be progressive. Let's have one cricket body, but that cricket body must be informed by good foundational values, equality, human dignity, etc., etc. But here we are today. And we will rely on the wisdom of people like you, Mr. Siopa. The collective wisdom of people who come here, whether as complainants or as administrators or as people who rebut some of the allegations that were made against them by some who considered that they were victimized in ways that were unfair and discriminatory. When all of this has been put into the pot and we have been able to try and do an analysis of it and come to some findings, we hope that this will be the last probe of its nature, because the board, the CA, if there is a will in the CSA board, then the board will have to find a way that will put an end to this unfinished business. Because it clearly is the unfinished business of cricket. That 30 years after union, we still haven't got union. We've got disparities in terms of where populations are located, in terms of what schools they go to, in terms of what clubs they are in terms of what the location of those clubs are. There's still a lot of disparity. And where there's disparity, you can call it by any other name. This whole thing of separate but equal is rubbish. Doesn't exist. It's actually an obfuscation of the truth that we want to segregate people in whatever ways. The whole intention is to perpetuate inequality. But we hope, maybe against hope, that with your inputs into this project, we will come with something that the powers that be find is worthy of being implemented without fear, favor, or prejudice.
We will rely on people like yourself, Advocate, because when you look at the bodies, like you said, you've had reputable people who've come. And whenever cricket processes are put against, beat the law, and I'll give an example. It's the very same union then opened charges against me.
Yes.
I was arrested. Went to court, case was dismissed on merit because there was no merit to it. And it is something that they don't want us to be able to challenge it. Because as a black administrator, one, you're not supposed to know as much as you do in terms of from a law perspective, from a governance perspective, and from an administration perspective. And when you then do know, it's trusted that you're not going to have enough finances because you guys are from the legal fraternity. You know legal costs are not exactly cheap. And there's a say, as one of the board members that at Eastern says, if you get them out, they'll fight us from the outside and they don't have enough money because such organizations have got money. They can afford to spend millions on making sure that you're outside. As Mpo, I'll run dry. But unfortunately, the kids will suffer. Our children will suffer. Our cricketers will suffer. So we hope this process is able to bring some kind of normalcy in terms of making sure that it closes the gap.
We hope so too.
Yeah.
We will adjourn now. And the next meeting we will hear the Easterns Cricket Union tomorrow. at 10 o'clock. We are adjourned.